Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this video, we're going to be solving consumer surplus, producer surplus, and deadweight loss for a variety of government interventions. We're going to be seeing things like price ceilings, price floors, taxes and subsidies. And before we get into it, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel, as it is the best way to support me and my desire to bring high quality, easy to consume tutorials to you at no cost. So without any more delay, please enjoy this video and leave a question if you have one. So this question, we're dealing with this supply and demand equation. So 51 minus 2q, that is our demand equation, and 4 plus 2q is our supply equation. And the first thing is to find the equilibrium price and quantity. And to do this, you simply want to set them equal to each other and solve. So 51.2q equals 4 plus 2q. So now do the algebra. So you'd get a quantity of 11.75, and then if you plug that back into either one, so I plugged it into demand, you would get an equilibrium price of 27.5, 27.5. So we have our equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. In the second question, we've asked you to find the consumer and producer surplus at equilibrium. So for this, I would suggest sketching out the supply and demand equation just to see it. So we know that the demand equation, I'm just going to bring these down. So the demand equation is 51 minus 2q. So I know that the intercept is 51, because if I were to plug in 0 as my quantity, I would have a price of 51. So 51 is up here, and demand is always sloping downwards. Now, I don't really care for the x-intercept, so I'm not going to find it. I also know that for the supply equation, if I were to plug in 0, I would get a price of 4. So I know that, I'll put that there, and this is sloping upwards. So supply and demand. Finally, I know equilibrium. I know that the equilibrium price is 27.5. And the equilibrium quantity is 11.75. So 27.5 here, 11.75 here. Great. So I've got a sketch. The consumer surplus is the triangle that is at the top. So below demand, above price, and to the left of the quantity. So that is simply a triangle. Consumer surplus would be the base, which is 11.75, times the height, which is the difference between 51 and 27.5, over. So you should get a consumer surplus of 138.06. For producer surplus, it would be the triangle that is below. So the trick is below price, above supply, and left of quantity. So 11.75 once again. This time multiplied by the difference between 27.5 and 4. All that divided by 2. And in this case, you'd get the same answer, 138.06. Now that does not always happen. This is mainly because they both have the same slope, one going up, one going down. So it was symmetric. But don't expect that to always be the case. Question number 3, we've asked you, what would be the consumer and producer surplus as well as the deadweight loss if a $20 ceiling was imposed? So if I were to take the graph and draw a horizontal line at $20, that would be a price ceiling. So what would happen here is the quantity would decrease to this line right here. And that's mainly because producers would not be as willing to supply that many products or that many units given a lower price. So the quantity shifts to the left. And the price is $20. If I were to follow the rule of below demand, above price, left of quantity, we would see that that trapezoid is the new consumer surplus. And the trick for producer surplus being below price, above supply, left of quantity, would make it so that this triangle would be the producer surplus. The triangle that's left out over here is your deadweight loss. So for the trapezoid, we're going to need this value. So we'll need to find quantity first, and then to see where that quantity value intersects with the demand equation. So let's begin by taking the $20 price and plugging it into the supply equation. So if price is $20, what is quantity supplied? So if we do the algebra here, we'd find that quantity supplied would be 8. So at $20, the quantity would drop to 8. Now if I take that value and plug it into demand, I can find that value for price up there. So that would intersect the demand equation at 35. So up here, we have 35. Okay, so we have everything we need to find the trapezoid. So for consumer surplus, the trapezoid would be the big base, so the difference between 51 and 20, and the small base, which is the difference between 35 and 20. All of that multiplied by the height, which is 8, and all of that divided by 2. So you would get a new consumer surplus of 184. For the producer surplus, it's a little simpler. We have a triangle, so I'll do it over here. So 8 multiplied by 20 minus 4, base times height, divided by 2. So the producer surplus is 64. Finally, the deadweight loss would be this triangle, which I will shade in orange. So I'll do that here, deadweight loss. The base would be 15, which is the difference between 35 and 20. The height is the difference between 11.75 and 8. All of that divided by 2. So the deadweight loss is 28.125. Question number 4, we've asked you to find the consumer producer surplus and the deadweight loss, this time if a $40 price floor is imposed. So a price floor would be a horizontal line above the equilibrium price. And if we follow the rule, below demand, above price, and left of quantity, your consumer surplus would be that triangle up there. Now, as far as producer surplus, well, by imposing a price floor of $40, fewer units will be sold. That is because consumers are going to be less willing to buy products if the price is higher. So the quantity will drop to right there, where the new price intersects the demand equation. So if I follow the rule of below price, above supply, left of quantity, that trapezoid is my producer surplus. And once again, this triangle here is your deadweight loss. Okay, so in order to find these values, we're going to need the new quantity and then use that quantity to find where it intersects with the supply equation. Great, so here we've got our supply and demand. We know the price is $40. I'm looking for where it's going to intersect demand, so I'm going to plug it into my demand equation. So if price is 40, and I do the algebra here, you would get a quantity of 5.5. Now, if we take that and plug it into the supply equation, you should get a price of 15. So it intersects the supply equation here at 15. Great. So I'm going to use just a basic triangle formula for consumer surplus. So I know that the quantity here was 5.5. So 5.5 multiplied by the difference between 51 and 40. All that divided by 2. So the consumer surplus now becomes only 30.25. For producer surplus, we have a trapezoid. So the big base is 36. The difference between 40 and 4. I'll highlight the trapezoid in orange here. So it would be this. This is the area we're finding right now. The small base would be the difference between 40 and 15. All of that multiplied by 5.5, which is the height, and then divided by 2. So the new producer surplus would be 167.75. As for the deadweight loss, we have a triangle. So the base would be the difference between 40 and 15. The height is the difference between 11.75 and 5.5. All that divided by 2. So you should get a deadweight loss of 78.125. Question number 5, you're asked to find the consumer surplus, producer surplus, and deadweight loss if an 8-unit production quota is imposed. Okay, so a production quota is a vertical line on the quantity function that limits the amount of quantity. And by limiting the quantity, it drives up the price. So the new price would be where this hits the demand equation. So now following the principles, or the trick, below demand, above price, left of quantity, we know that this triangle up here is consumer surplus. Below price, above supply, left of quantity, we know that this trapezoid is the producer surplus. And this triangle here is deadweight loss. So this actually looks very similar to a price floor. In fact, it has the same effect. So the first thing we'll do is take our quantity of 8, plug it into the demand equation to find that new price. Okay, so if I take my demand equation and plug in a quantity of 8, I'll get a price of 35. Now if I take 8 and plug it into the supply equation, you'd get a price of 20. So I know that it intersects supply here at 20. So I've got all the values I need now to find the areas. So we'll start with consumer surplus, which is a triangle. So the base would be the difference between 51 and 35 times 8 divided by 2. So for this, you should get 64. Producer surplus is a trapezoid. So the difference between 35 and 4 plus 35 minus 20, so big base plus small base, all of that times the height, which is 8, then all of that divided by 2. And you should get 184. As for the deadweight loss, triangle, so 35 minus 20, that's the base. The height is 11.75 minus 8. All that divided by 2. And the deadweight loss here is 28.125. Question number 6. We've asked you this time, what would be the consumer producer surplus and deadweight loss if a $1 per unit tax is imposed? So this one has a few more steps. And the first step should always be to add the tax to the price in the demand equation. And that is because the consumer will pay the price that the supplier sets plus tax. So think of it as the price the consumer pays is the price the supplier sets plus tax. So given that, I can rewrite this demand equation as the price the supplier sets plus $1, that's the tax, equals 51 minus 2Q. And then the supply equation is just the same. So for now, unaffected. And we're going to solve a new equilibrium. So I'm going to start by sending this one over here. So my demand equation is the supplier price equals 50 minus 2Q. I just subtracted 1 basically from this side. And using that, we're going to find our new equilibrium. So 50 minus 2Q equals 4 plus 2Q. The new quantity you should find is 11.5. So if the quantity is 11.5, the supplier's price would be 4 plus 2 times that, which is 27. And the consumer's price would be 27 plus 1, 28. So this would be the effect of imposing the tax. Quantity would drop slightly from 11.75 to 11.5. The supplier would be charging $27, but the consumer would be paying $28. Now, if we show that graphically, I'll put a line here. We'll call that 11.5. We know that it's going to intersect demand at the consumer's price, so that'll be 28. And it's going to hit supply at the supplier's price, which is 27. Now, the triangle above 28 is your consumer surplus. The triangle below 27 is your producer surplus. The rectangle in between is tax revenue for the government. And this triangle is deadweight loss. Okay, so consumer surplus is just that triangle. So the difference between 51 and 28 times 11.5 divided by 2. So the consumer surplus is 132.25. Producer surplus is the difference between 27 and 4 times 11.5 divided by 2. Also 132.25. The tax revenue is simply the tax multiplied by the quantity. So $1 times 11.5 is 11.5. And the deadweight loss is that triangle. So 1, which is the difference between 28 and 27. So 1 times 0.25, the distance between 11.5 and 11.75, divided by 2. So tiny, tiny deadweight loss here of just 0.125. So a $1 tax in this case would not really harm the economy very, very much. In the final part of this video, we've asked you to find the consumer surplus, producer surplus, and deadweight loss if a $2 subsidy is given. So a subsidy is very similar to a tax. We sometimes call it a reverse tax because instead of the government charging the consumer an additional amount, the government will pay an additional amount or a certain amount for the consumer. So first step to me is always to take the subsidy and add it to the supply equation. The reason for that is the way subsidies work, the supplier's price is the consumer's price plus the subsidy. The supplier will receive whatever the consumer pays plus an additional, in this case, $2 from the government. So my demand equation, I'm going to leave it as it is. But for my supply equation, I'm going to replace that P by consumer price plus $2. Set that equal to 4 plus 2Q. And solve for the consumer's price. I want to simplify this. So I just subtracted 2 here. So that is my new supply equation. Now I'll take that, set it equal to my demand equation, and solve for Q. So the equilibrium quantity increases to 12.25. If I plug that in to my demand equation, I get a consumer's price of 26.5. And then I know that the supplier's price would just be 26.5 plus the $2 subsidy, 28.5. So we see here the effect of the subsidy. More units being sold, a lower price for the consumer and a higher price for the supplier. That is the point of a subsidy, is to help everybody. We want more people to buy. We want more suppliers to supply. But it comes at a cost to the government. So now if I were to plot all this, I'll start by putting a vertical line here. That is to show the new quantity of 12.25. I know that it's going to hit the supply equation at 28.5. That is the new supplier's price. And it's going to hit the demand equation at 26.5, the new consumer's price. Now, this graph might be a little bit harder to read, but I'll try and make sense of it for you. If you follow the principle of below demand, above price, left of quantity, you would find that that big triangle is the consumer surplus, because the consumer's price is 26.5. So if I were to shade in orange here, that would be the consumer surplus. So let's calculate that. It's just a big triangle. So the difference between 51 and 26.5 multiplied by 12.25 divided by 2. So you'd get 150.0625. Now for producer surplus, it would be basically the mirror image of that. If you follow the principle of producer surplus, it is below price, but the supplier's price is 28.5. Above supply, left of quantity. So if I were to shade this in a different color, that would be this triangle. Okay, so producer surplus would be the difference between 28.5 and 4 times 12.25 over 2. The cost to the government is just the quantity multiplied by the subsidy. So in this case, it would be 12.25 times 2. So 24.5. And the deadweight loss is just this little triangle here. So that is $2, the difference between 28.5 and 26.5, so from here to here. Times the height, so between 11.25 and 11.75. I'll write that out. All that divided by 2. So you would get a deadweight loss here of just 0.5. That's it for this video, guys. I hope you found it to be useful. Please leave a comment below if you have any questions or if there's something you're not sure about, and I will see you all at the next video.